13 letters in the New Testament carry Paul's name, but what if nearly half of them weren't written by him? Scholars have sorted these 13 letters into 3 categories: letters Paul definitely wrote, letters he almost certainly did not, and a contested gray zone in between. The evidence is hiding in the Greek, and your English Bible is designed to cover it up. Here's the map. 7 letters form the undisputed core: Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, and Philemon. Virtually all scholars agree Paul wrote these. At the other end, 3 letters: 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and the Titus, the pastoral epistles, are widely regarded as pseudepigraphic, meaning a later author wrote them in Paul's name. That leaves 3 in the middle: Colossians, Ephesians, and 2 Thessalonians. These are genuinely disputed. Scholars with excellent credentials land on both sides. Today we focus on Colossians and Ephesians, the heart of the debate. One important clarification before we go further: pseudepigraphy, writing in a revered teacher's name, was a common and accepted practice in the ancient world. Students and disciples honored their teacher by extending his thought under his authority. This was not a forgery in the modern sense. No one was trying to deceive. The audience often understood the convention. So when scholars say a letter is a pseudepigraphic, they're describing a literary practice, not making a moral accusation. To understand why scholars doubt some of these letters, we first need to know what Paul sounds like. The undisputed letters reveal a consistent voice, direct, passionate, sometimes grammatically rough. Paul dictated his letters aloud, and you can hear it. Take Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. In Greek, the sentences are short and punchy. Paul writes, "I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel." Not that there is another gospel. You can feel the emotion. He starts a thought, interrupts himself, corrects course. This is someone thinking on his feet, speaking to a scribe. Short clauses, abrupt transitions, a voice you'd recognize in a room. Now compare that to Colossians chapter 1, verses 3 through 8. In your English Bible, this passage looks like 3 or 4 normal sentences, but in Greek, it's one sentence. One continuous, architecturally complex sentence. This style is called periodic style. Long sentences built from chains of dependent clauses, relative pronouns, and participles. A dependent clause can't stand alone. It hangs off a main clause. A relative pronoun, words like who, which, that, links one clause to the next. A participle is a verb acting as a modifier, like having heard or bearing fruit. In Colossians 1, 3 through 8, these elements chain together into a single flowing structure. English translators break it apart because a 200-word sentence doesn't work in English, but the editorial choice hides the evidence. The original Greek reads nothing like Paul's short, punchy dictation style. Let's put these 2 styles side by side. Paul's undisputed letters feature short sentences, speech-like rhythm, grammatical irregularities, and direct conversational energy. Average sentence length, roughly 15 to 25 words. Colossians and Ephesians feature enormously long sentences, smooth clause chaining through relative pronouns and participles, elaborate architectural craftsmanship, and polished literary composition. Average sentence length, 50 to over 200 words. This is not a subtle difference. These are 2 fundamentally different ways of constructing Greek prose. If Colossians is suspicious, Ephesians takes everything to the next level. Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 through 14 is a single Greek sentence. 201 words without a period. Let that sink in. 201 words, one sentence. The structure works like this. A main clause launches the sentence, then a relative pronoun introduces a new clause, which triggers a participle phrase. which opens into a prepositional cascade, which feeds into another relative pronoun, and only goes for 12 verses. This is a carefully crafted literary composition designed to impress a listening congregation. It is not how Paul writes. Your English Bible breaks this passage into 6 to 8 sentences. Every one of those periods is an editorial addition. The translators are doing their job, not producing readable English, but the cost is invisible evidence. Beyond sentence structure, Colossians and Ephesians share vocabulary that Paul never uses in his undisputed letters. The most striking example is the Greek phrase ta epourania, literally the heavenlies, referring to the heavenly realms. Ephesians uses this term 5 times. Chapter 1 verse 3, chapter 1 verse 20, chapter 2 verse 6, chapter 3 verse 10, and chapter 6 verse 12. Colossians uses closely related language in chapter 1 verses 16 and 20. Paul's 7 undisputed letters, the term never appears, not once. This shared vocabulary links Colossians and Ephesians to each other and separates them from Paul's established word choices. So how are Colossians and Ephesians related to each other? 3 scholarly positions compete. Position 1, the same author wrote both. This explains the similarities but doesn't account for why Ephesians consistently amplifies and elaborates beyond Colossians. Position 2, Paul wrote Colossians and the later author wrote Ephesians using it as a model. This explains Ephesians' dependence, but Colossians itself has the disputed stylistic features we just examined. Position 3, the leading theory among critical scholars. 2 different Pauline disciples wrote them. Disciple A composed Colossians. Disciple B later used Colossians as a template and expanded it into Ephesians. This accounts for both the deep similarities and the systematic amplification. One thing to clarify, disputed does not mean scholars think it's fake. Disputed means the evidence genuinely splits the field. Some excellent scholars defend Pauline authorship of Colossians on strong grounds, others reject it on equally strong grounds. The amber category is not a polite way of saying pseudepigraphic. It reflects a real, ongoing academic debate where the stylistic evidence points one direction and other considerations, like theological continuity with Paul, push back. Honest scholars disagree. That's what makes this a live question. So what do you do with this information the next time you open your Bible? First, a practical skill. When you read Colossians or Ephesians and see short, tidy English sentences, mentally reconstruct the original. That passage was one massive sentence in Greek. The translators broke it apart for readability. Free interlinear tools and online Greek texts let you see this for yourself. Second, look for the clause chaining sequences of who, which, in whom, having been. Those are the themes where the translator inserted periods that don't exist in the original. Here's why this matters theologically. If Colossians and Ephesians were written by disciples rather than Paul himself, they represent the development of Pauline theology after Paul, a living tradition, not a single frozen voice. The cosmic Christ of Colossians, the grand ecclesiology of Ephesians. This may be where Paul's students took his ideas next. The next time someone quotes Paul, it's worth asking, which Paul? The historical letter writer or the tradition that carried his name forward?